When the alarm started blaring, everyone ran for the escape pods. Except one human. The stealth cruiser Silent Promise drifted through the dark edges of enemy territory. It was a spy vessel, designed for one purpose: gather intelligence without being seen. Inside its narrow corridors worked a small crew of specialists from several allied species. Among them was a human. Agent Daniel Hayes. Officially, he was listed as a communications technician. Unofficially, he was the mission's spy. For weeks the ship had quietly monitored enemy fleet movements. Everything was going smoothly. Until the alarms began. Red lights flooded the corridors as the emergency sirens screamed through the ship. Enemy fleet detected. Multiple ships locking weapons. Stealth field compromised. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos. Captain Redhis, a tall reptilian officer, shouted orders. All personnel prepare for emergency evacuation. The spy cruiser had never been designed for battle. Its only defense was running away. Unfortunately, the enemy fleet had already surrounded them. Explosions rattled the hull. The captain's voice echoed through the ship. All crew abandoned ship. Escape pods began launching rapidly. Crew members rushed through the corridors toward the evacuation bays. Agent Hayes moved with them. But halfway there, he stopped. A faint sound reached his ears. A weak voice. Help. Hayes turned toward a damaged corridor where smoke filled the air. Inside, trapped beneath fallen debris, was a Vulpine officer. A small fox-like alien named Lyra. She had been injured when the ship was hit. The corridor was collapsing around her. The evacuation alarm continued blaring. Hayes glanced toward the escape pod bay. Then back at the trapped Vulpine. There was only one pod left. And barely enough time to reach it. Most people would have kept running. But Hayes turned around. And ran toward the collapsing corridor instead. There was only one escape pod left. And two people who needed it. Hayes dropped beside the trapped Vulpine. Lyra's breathing was shallow. A metal beam pinned her leg to the floor. "Don't move," Hayes said. "I'm going to get you out." The ship trembled violently as another explosion shook the hull. Lyra shook her head weakly. "You should go," she whispered. "There's only one pod left." Hayes ignored her. He grabbed the beam and tried to lift it. It didn't move. The Vulpine looked toward the corridor. "You'll die here if you stay." Hayes sighed. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." He checked the timer on the evacuation alert. Less than 2 minutes before the reactor overloaded. No time. No equipment. Just strength. Hayes braced his feet against the wall and pulled with everything he had. The beam shifted slightly. Lyra gasped. Hayes gritted his teeth and lifted again. This time the beam rose enough for her to pull her leg free. "Go!" Hayes shouted. They limped down the corridor together. Behind them, flames spread rapidly. The escape pod bay came into view. One pod remained. Just one. Lyra stopped when she saw it. Her ears lowered. "There's only space for one." Hayes nodded. "Yeah." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Hayes opened the pod door. "Get in." Lyra stared at him. "No. You saved me. We go together." Hayes shook his head. "Pod can't hold two." The reactor warning siren blared louder. 30 seconds remaining. Hayes gently pushed her toward the seat. "Go." "But you." "Not part of the mission," he said with a small smile. Lyra's eyes widened. "You knew this might happen." Hayes shrugged. "Spy work." She hesitated. Then finally climbed inside. Before the door closed, she looked up at him. "Why?" Hayes smiled faintly. Because someone should survive to tell the story. Then he pressed the launch button. The Vulpine watched the ship explode. And realized what the human had done. The escape pod launched just seconds before the reactor detonated. Lyra's small craft spun away from the dying cruiser. Through the viewport she saw the silent promise surrounded by enemy ships. Then the explosion came. A brilliant white flash filled space. The human ship vanished in a burst of fire and debris. Lyra stared silently. Agent Hayes was gone. The enemy fleet scattered as the explosion damaged several nearby ships. The pod drifted quietly through the battlefield. Inside, Lyra sat motionless. She replayed the last moments again and again. The human had stayed behind. Not because he had to. But because he chose to. Hours later, an Allied patrol ship recovered her pod. When the crew opened the hatch, they found Lyra sitting quietly. "What happened?" the officer asked. She looked up slowly. "The human saved me." News of the event spread quickly through the Alliance. At first, many believed it was simply a tragic accident. But when the spy agency reviewed the mission logs, they discovered something surprising. Agent Hayes had been the mission's most valuable operative. He had access to the final escape pod before anyone else. He could have left first. Instead, he had gone back. Across the Alliance, soldiers and civilians heard the story. And many asked the same question. Why would a human sacrifice themselves for someone from another species? The answer came from an old human saying. A phrase Hayes had once written in his mission notes. No one gets left behind. The galaxy learned something important about humans that day. Weeks later, the Galactic Alliance held a memorial. Not just for the lost ship. But for one human spy. Lyra stood among dozens of diplomats and officers. In front of them was a simple plaque. Agent Daniel Hayes. Human Intelligence Division. Below it was a short message. He chose to save another. Many species found the story difficult to understand. Among most civilizations, survival always came first. But humans were different. A human commander explained it during the memorial. Humans don't measure strength the same way others do. We measure it by what we protect. He looked at Lyra. And sometimes, that means protecting someone else. The Vulpine lowered her head respectfully. Because she knew something the others didn't. Hayes had not acted heroically in his mind. To him, it had simply been the right thing to do. And that realization spread quietly across the galaxy. Humans might not be the strongest species. Or the fastest. Or the most advanced. But they possessed something rare. Compassion powerful enough to risk everything. From that day forward, whenever someone questioned humanity's place in the Alliance, the answer was simple. Because when everything goes wrong, when the alarms sound and the last escape pod remains, humans are the species most likely to give it to someone else. And sometimes, that makes them the bravest species in the galaxy.